I am Sister Bernadette Anello. I come from the United States. I entered with the Missionary Sisters in 1963 as what we call then a postulant, what we call today a candidate.
So can you please tell us how you meet the sisters and why you decided to join the congregation?
It's very interesting. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and there was only one mission in Brooklyn where our sisters worked, and that was in my parish, Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary and St. Stephen's Parish. So meeting them, I saw them every day in our neighborhood, walking the streets, going to the school, going to the church, going back to their convent, and there were no other sisters in the area. So I grew up with them. They were my teachers since pre-kindergarten, and I enjoyed them so much. Their whole philosophy of education, the pedagogy of education of the heart, touched me so much that I then went on to Mother Cabrini High School because our sisters taught there in Upper Manhattan. What I said was interesting is that meeting them, it's like God put my family in that place. If I had lived in another part of Brooklyn, I would have never met them. There were sisters from many, many other congregations throughout the borough of Brooklyn. And I met them later, but already the MSCs had made an impact on me.
And can you please tell us at the end of the day why you said, okay, I want to be a sister, if you don't mind?
I looked at these women. They were great teachers. They were fun to be with. I never felt like going to school was a chore. It was something that excited me. And it wasn't just school. Again, they gave testimony in the neighborhood. The convent and the school were very far apart, about 8 blocks. The church was near the convent. So when they were walking, they would stop along the way. They'd talk to shopkeepers, to grandmas, to little children, listen to someone who was in dire need of something and say, okay, we'll come visit you later. Hear that somebody was in the hospital or in prison, we will go visit them. And this made an impact on me. I watched and I saw that they were not just teachers. They were present in the neighborhood according to the needs of the people. And at that time, I don't think I was trying to decipher what was meant by missionary sisters of the Sacred Heart, but I just watched these women and I said, I want to be like them. Because they didn't stop, they didn't draw a line and say, okay, we do this, but no more. And even with school, they didn't just teach classes. They took an interest in us and pushed limits so that we began taking part in all kinds of contests, poetry contests, essay contests, speech contests. And at first they started with the boys because it was an elementary school, so that we were boys and girls together. And then many of the sisters said, well, the girls can do this too. So we started entering into all kinds of competitions and winning. So again, it was that idea, the sky's the limit. Develop your skills, use your talents to the best of your ability.
Thank you. So you became a missionary sister.
Yes.
And can you please tell us something about your experiences as a missionary, the places you were missioned, even the position that you had, that you now have, that maybe you had in the Institute in the past years?
There have been many different places and many different positions. I think what first surprised me when I entered, I loved teaching. I thought I'd be an elementary school teacher all the days of my life. And of all my careers, that's been the shortest. It was the initial one, and it lasted for a number of years, but then all of a sudden I was catapulted into going to the university and being the director of resident life. And I remember my co-teachers, not just the sisters, but the male and female co-teachers with whom I worked said, Going to university is not like teaching elementary school. And I said, I realize that. And I was just a few years older than the college students themselves. But that was a great experience. It was many times a disciplinary situation. That part I didn't like. The pastoral side of it, I loved. I got to know those students, the women and the men who were studying at university, had great relationships with them that exist to this day. You know, they've been married now, they've raised children, and still they write and keep up some sort of a communication. What it said to me is that in this life, you think you're going to do something, and then God has other plans. And what I've enjoyed is that every surprise turned out to be a gift. I can't think of one thing that I've done where I said, oh, I regret that I did that. I can't. And sometimes individuals will ask me, well, what did you like the best? What place did you like the best? Or what mission or what work did you like the best? That's too hard for me to answer because I have found a delight in each one of them. They were so different. Working on a college campus as director of resident life, and then another time as the director of campus ministry. Now that was interesting because it was like being pastor, only you're not in a parish and you're not under a bishop, but on the campus, I was the one who had to orchestrate all the campus ministry activities, and I worked with a team, and it was wonderful. In my life, in traveling and working in parish ministry, volunteering at a hospital to do pastoral care there during the summers when I was teaching, going abroad, working in the Philippines, working shorter times in Ethiopia, and then in this current position as general counselor, visiting so many of the international communities and missions. The scope of our mission is so grand. Going to Australia, seeing the mission of the hospital and then all the outreach clinics. It's just amazing. And to be with the women and men, sisters and lay partners in mission who are so committed to our work to bring the love of God wherever we are in the world. And not only to bring it, but to recognize it in the people where we are. It's not like God sent me to bring love to people. Every person in every part of the world has the love of God within them. But what's meant to happen, as I understand it, is that the love in you and the love in me, when we come together, it becomes a bigger flame. And you start putting that together with many people, it's a bonfire. It's a bonfire. So I think that's the exciting part of life, to be open to possibilities. To not second guess what it's going to look like or how it's going to feel, but just to enter into it.
And there is an experience, an encounter, I don't know, something that really has a huge impact on you as a person during all these years.
It would be hard for me to name one thing that had an impact in my life. Maybe if I was 20 years old, I could give you one thing that impacted me. But over the decades, so many things happened at different stages of my life. Vatican II would probably be the one that first impacted me. As I was entering, that was coming to fruition. So many of the sisters who came before me will talk about what life was like in community and mission then. Well, my experience of that was this much. The greater part of my life has been the aftermath of Vatican II. So things were constantly changing, constantly. When we stayed more enclosed as a congregation of sisters, which was true at that time for almost all religious congregations, it began to open up. We started doing things with other congregations, and not just congregations of women, but congregations of men. So the breadth and scope of that just kept opening up new possibilities. I remember when I was the National Vocation Director for the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart, and I worked on vocation teams with our own sisters, but then with sisters from other congregations and brothers and priests from other groups, and we started going out as teams. Before Vatican II, that didn't happen very much, practically not at all. Every congregation took care of their own needs separately. But this united effort enabled us to come together with people of like minds and hearts, have fun together, and it never seemed like a burden. I never felt like a lone ranger. I guess that's what I wanted to say. And even when I was National Vocation Director, the first thing I did was start a team. Interestingly, almost every mission I've gone on has involved a team. Campus ministry, it was a team. Director of Resident Life, it was a team. Doing family ministry at Old St. Pat's in Chicago, I formed an advisory board of family members. And for me, what's important is that the people you are serving, their voices need to be heard. And when you're in a position as director, it's kind of easy. Hear what they're saying, assess their needs, and then just make it happen. So many times, like with family ministry, the advisory board would say, "Sister, so what do you think we should be doing?" I said, "No, you're here to tell me. I don't have a husband and children. You do, or you have a wife and children, or your grandparents, and you have generations of children. What is it that they most need at this point here in this mission church?" And then when they started coming up with creative ideas, I said, "Okay, my job is to make sure it happens. That's all. Make sure the pastor understands that this is a priority, and then just do it." So Vatican II would be one impact.
Thank you. And how would you describe the ministry that you're living now, your actual ministry?
Well, it was one I would have never imagined. The last two general chapters that we've had, I was scheduled to do something very different. And in the 11th hour, that got changed because of the way the chapter went. With this chapter back in 2014, I was scheduled to work at a very interesting and new mission in New Orleans with sisters from other congregations to open a house where young women who were discerning vocation ministry would come and live together in community. And since we had done that many years just as MSCs with Cabrini Mission Corps and candidates for our congregation, I've been living with young women for many, many years and then working on a college campus with them. So this to me was something very inviting. My involvement in the Philippines has a long history. For a period of about 10 years, I was the liaison when I was on provincial council, working with our province at that time, Stella Maris, in the United States. And I was asked to go to be the one person on council to keep an eye and to keep visiting the Philippines. And then a chapter, when my name came up for election and I knew I was going to become a general counselor, I had to let go of all that. It had happened in the previous chapter too. I was supposed to be working in a parish in Lower Manhattan, moved all my things there to the rectory. They had a little apartment for the sister who had lived there previously, and now I was coming into that place. And the one stipulation I had said is that it had 2 bedrooms so that I could have a missioner living with me. And again, after chapter, I was heading to the Philippines, so had to go collect, not me personally, but have a team come collect all that stuff, take it out. And that's where I've learned, even now, when people say, "Well, what's your next step?" I said, "I don't know. I'm waiting till after chapter. We'll see." To this day, I think what I prize the most is that in the hearts of a Filipino community, you never leave them. They never say goodbye. You're always dwelling in their hearts. So I have Skype meetings with them. They send emails. The young women who lived at Casa Cabrini with us, a number of them have gotten married, have had their first child or their second child, and I get all these news. I get the photos, I get the family pictures, and then sometimes they'll just say, "Can we visit by Skype? I just want to talk with you." because they were so used to having that as part of the mission of Casa Cabrini that I would meet with them pastorally once a month just to hear them out. What were their concerns? What were their difficulties and challenges? What were their joys? And I think what's most interesting, as with all human nature, of all the women who came through Casa Cabrini, just like in school when you're teaching, there's always one child that tends to be more challenging. There was one young woman, extremely intelligent, who was studying chemical engineering. Now, I couldn't have helped her with her courses to save my life. With the English, yes, I could help her with that. But she was so determined to be her own self and needed no help whatsoever. So, how much she got out of her experience at Casa Cabrini, I'm not sure. But she was there for a number of years. Now she has 2 children, a little boy and a little girl. And she has said to me more than once, I lost all those good experiences because I didn't put my heart and my mind into it. Now I realize what was given to us.
Tell us more about the relation with the sisters. You lived in community for all this year. Mm-hmm. How was it?
Living in community with the sisters from the time I was a postulant or candidate has been interesting. What has changed dramatically are the number of sisters with whom I live. When I first entered the community, I was living in Philadelphia, and the community numbered about 24. And some of us, 3 of us were postulants, the rest were professed sisters. Then as the years went on, living in different communities, the numbers varied, depending whether I was at the college campus or living in a parish. And because we are so spread out, in many places you didn't need a large number of sisters. What I found pretty early on when we started to have young people living with us and volunteering to be on mission with us, each of the communities were asked if they were open for that. It wasn't imposed on them. And I said from day one, I would always like to be a part of a community that was welcoming lay people to live with us, whether they were as volunteers, Cabrini Mission Corps, candidates looking for a living experience, whatever, I would do that. So I would say again, pretty early on, that was happening. So even community life was sisters and lay people living together. But predominantly the lay people would be young women who were discerning their future and trying to see if they were called to a missionary lifestyle and what community was like for them. So we, if anything, demystified. Instead of keeping it, like for myself, when I entered, I wouldn't have known what community life was like. I just saw how the sisters interacted with each other in the school setting, but I didn't live in the convent with them. As soon as you have lay people living with you day in and day out and sharing all the responsibilities, they begin to see what normal life in community is. It's like every other group. You have responsibilities, you share, you pray together, you work together. Our ministries many times were varied, so we weren't all working at one ministry site. But the enrichment for me of that is that you come back with varied experiences. So you tell the stories in the evening.
Good. The last things. Strengths and needs of the Institute according to you now?
I would say that we're missionary from the beginning, that Mother Cabrini had the daring do to follow her dream. You know, we refer to it as Chiquina's dream from when she was a little girl, that she wanted to be a missionary, and her older sister, many people, her teachers just said, it's a nice dream, but impossible. And so she followed the impossible dream. She wouldn't give up on it. And I really am grateful for her pastor who, at a very tender age, said to her, Chiquina, follow what Jesus is saying in your heart. It's like him saying, don't listen to all those other voices. They don't know. You listen clearly to what God is saying and follow that. And she did. She absolutely did. When I said before that, growing up in Brooklyn, if I had lived in another parish, I would have never known the missionary sisters. I am so grateful for that experience. I met other groups of sisters, Dominicans, Franciscans, Sisters of Charity, Religious Sisters of Mercy, on and on and on, and none of them struck me the same way. There was more of a formality when I met with them, and I was older, so I could discern what their gifts were, but none of them touched me the way the missionary sisters did. So we've been able to hold on to that missionary concept. It's one of our strengths, and it speaks of taking risks. We have gone to places and we have done things where other people do not go. Uganda is a perfect example, one of the last missionary endeavors we've taken on. We went to a place there where nobody was, no other group of sisters, and right away, sisters volunteered from all over the world. We had to pick and choose from the number that volunteered. Now that was saying something, because it's not like they didn't like the mission where they were, but they got excited by the adventure of going and doing something new. So that to me is a big hallmark. The needs that we have are more courageous people willing to take the risk. And I say this about our partners in mission as well as our sisters. We need people who are willing to follow that call from God, to hear it clearly and say, I will do this, to have that same daring do that Francesca Cabrini did. Knowing there are going to be obstacles, knowing there are going to be challenges, knowing there are going to be failures. But that's part of the game. It's part of the game plan. She said, I can do all things in him who strengthens me. And she knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that in weakness there is strength, as St. Paul said. And collectively, we know that even more. I've never had to rely on just my own strengths, never. But collectively, we are strong.
Thank you. So what you would like to say to a young woman who is thinking about consecrating her life to Jesus through the missionary sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus?
Whether these individuals are very young or not so young, if a woman senses that God is asking more from her life, as I did, I dated, I had steady boyfriends, I loved dancing, I went to all kinds of dances and parties, I went to proms, and I kept saying, but I want something more. And I think the telltale sign was I couldn't picture myself spending the rest of my life with one individual. Those were the litmus tests for me. So I think for any individual, that person has to have her own litmus test. What is it that gives me joy? What is it that God is putting before me? What am I satisfied with? What do I want? The hard part was letting go of having a loving relationship with another individual and having my own children. Hands down, that was a sacrifice. But I think the reward has been, throughout life, I've had many children. I don't call them my children, especially some of them are adults now. But I think what I prize so much is that I have a relationship with them that is so wonderful, so deep. And teaching does that from the beginning. And I guess that's why I was drawn to teaching so much, because I taught elementary, I taught 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. And then I did a little bit of high school teaching. But constantly, there's a sense of, here is an individual, here is a child of God. Masculine, feminine didn't matter. They're gifted. Do they know that? Can I help them see how much God loves them by just reinforcing that message? You know, as I said, when I was in elementary school and I had those pictures of the Sacred Heart of Jesus and Immaculate Heart of Mary before me, that to me was a constant message of you are loved. Even with the crucifix there, you are loved. And why wouldn't I want to share that with others? So for individuals who feel that call to go beyond, to do more, trust that God, who is so generous, will not be outdone with love.
Thank you. We're done.
It is finished.
Yes, finished.
Thank you, gentlemen.